All right, well, hey, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us, whether you're watching from around the Lake Almanar area or far away. We are in a series in Mark, and if you've been with us, you know this. If not, welcome and join in on Mark chapter 5 today. We're going to be looking today at the power of King Jesus again. We've seen it on full display in Mark already. And today we're going to see his power and authority as he deals with many demons at once, and then a little bit later how he heals two daughters. And so this is some incredible scripture we get to look at. But just to review, last week, if you were with us, we left with Jesus and his disciples in a boat. And remember, the storm came and Jesus was asleep and the disciples were terrified and they woke him up. And he says to them, "Why are you so afraid?" This is after calming the wind and the waves. "Peace, be still." And it calmed. And he said, "Why are you so afraid? Have you no faith?" And their response was this. Mark describes it, says, "And they were filled with great fear, and they said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" We've titled this series, "Who Do You Say That I Am?" because that's a question that comes out in the center of Mark from Jesus himself. And we see here the disciples are still not quite understanding. They see something amazing here, but they're like, who is this guy? And so we're going to continue to see his power on display. But I'd like to just pray for us before we read our chapter today. God, we're so glad that we get to have some time together in your word today. I pray that you would use your word to do what only you could do. And that would be to enlighten the eyes of our heart, to love you and know you more, so that our lives would be more fully surrendered to you. Thank you for your love for us and the way you've given us your spirit and the scriptures so that our lives can continue to be transformed. And we pray this all because of Jesus. Amen. So we're going to go from this storm-tossed sea in this boat immediately to a storm-tossed man. So we're going to see Jesus confront and conquer and then commission here. So let's look at the confrontation. Mark 5, chapter 1 is where we are. If you want to pause it and grab your Bible or get that out, it'd be great to have it open as we do look at this together. It says this: "They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes." And this is, there's a little map here to show you, but Jesus' ministry on the Galilee, this is the Sea of Galilee, or the area called Galilee. It's really lake, it's about the same size as Lake Almanar, as Kevin shared last week here. But they go on to the eastern side now, and it's kind of if you look at the map, the Gerasenes kind of goes up the hill down there, through the valley and up the hill, and so it's kind of the southeastern side. And this is kind of known as the wilderness. It's kind of like the other side of the tracks, this side of Galilee. This is the Gentile side, which is near Decapolis, this 10 Greek cities. But it's known for idolatry and demons and being wild over there because it's not Jewish territory. And again, Decapolis means 10 cities, and it's this confederation of 10 Greek city-states, and it's mostly on the south and east of Galilee. So they go to the other side of the boat. Remember, Jesus had just calmed that storm, so they just keep going to the other side. And it says this in verse 2. Pardon me. "When Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately," there's our word that's used 40 or so times throughout Mark, "there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains. But he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke shackles into pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones." So we have this crazy scene. They get off the boat, and this guy comes running to him or meets him there. He's unclean because he's among the tombs. We've seen this already in Mark with leprosy. He has unnatural, superhuman strength. And it says he has an unclean spirit that is driving all this. And so this guy he's in terrible shape, but they've tried to bind him and keep him from going crazy, and even breaks apart the bonds. So he's helpless, homeless. He's actually being destroyed. He's cutting himself with stones. It seems like the unclean spirit is intent on killing this guy, like actually wrecking and ending his life. No doubt everyone in the area knew about this crazy guy that they had all tried to restrain or keep in one spot so he wouldn't keep running around wreaking havoc. So we see this confrontation boiling here, and then we're going to see Jesus conquer it in verse 6. It says, he saw Jesus from afar, and he ran and fell down before him. It's interesting, this unclean spirit that's driving this man doesn't run the other direction, but it runs toward Jesus. And it says he falls down before him. And then verse 7 says, crying out with a loud voice, he says, what do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, I plead with you, by God, do not torment me. For Jesus had said, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. So this is the tense in verse 8 is this past continuous action. It's called the aorist tense in Greek. You don't really need to know that, but it's saying that Jesus had already said, come out. He was casting the demon out, and the demon speaks to him, or this man does. We don't really know what's going on here yet. But this guy falls down before Jesus, recognizing his power. And we've already seen the demon-possessed people identify Jesus at least twice in Mark already, back in 1:24 and 3:11, where they say, Son of the Most High, or I know who you are. And so the demon recognizes Jesus. And remember, this is right after the disciples had just said, who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Like, who is this guy? And the demon actually calls Jesus out by name. Interesting contrast. We read in James 2:19 that this isn't a believing faith that demons have. They just know who Jesus is. James said it this way, you believe that God is one. You do well. That's a good thing. But even the demons believe and shudder. So we see this here. This demon knows who he's standing, or actually in this case, bowing before. It's really interesting. He says, I adjure you by God. I'm kind of calling the God card out here, and I'd like you to ask God, basically, or I'm pleading with you by the name of God, somehow thinking like, if I invoke God's name, this will somehow help me in my cause. What cause is the demon pleading for? Well, he says that you would not torment. Do not torment me. And this is the same word we see in Revelation 20, verse 10, when Jesus has returned to judge all the living and the dead, and the marriage supper of the Lamb has happened. And then it says he casts and tosses Satan and hell and all that don't yet or have chosen not to believe in God into this lake of fire for torment. This is the same word here. So he's asking that this demon is asking that Jesus would not send him to that torment at this point. So we don't know much more than that, but that's what he's, calls to mind this verse. And Jesus does something really interesting here. And we learn a lot more about this demon-possessed guy. Look at verse 9. So remember, he just said, I beg you by the name of God himself, please don't send me off to torment. Jesus says, what is your name? This is very interesting. He says, what is your name? He asked for the name of the demon. Wonder why I did that. But the demon replies, and if you've read this before, you know this. He says, my name is Legion, for we are many. So we find out this isn't just a guy that's demon-possessed, but something else, something more is going on here. He is possessed, but it's not just one demon. So Jesus does a strange thing. He asks a demon his name, and we've noted this before. Some people think that this is a way to gain power over demonic forces, but we know from previous episodes that Jesus doesn't need magic or spells or some kind of magic incantation or the exact words. He acts with his own divine authority. So most people think that the purpose of this question was to reveal the powerful nature of this demonic pressure to the watching world, his disciples especially, but then anybody else who might be around or would hear about it. A legion, this word legion, is 5,000 to 6,000 foot soldiers and 120 horsemen. So this is a Roman division. That's what that word legion meant. So this is either it's a highly organized attack of demons or a bunch of demons in this guy. It's not real clear which it is, but most likely it's more than one demon harassing and in this guy. So Jesus is most likely showing his disciples that he has the power not only over those who are harassed by one demon, which he's already shown all over the place, but there's also, he has power over any number of demons. It could be all of them. It could be tens of thousands or whatever. And it's fascinating, I think, the next thing that happens even more. So I'm Legion, but then the demons make another request. Look at verse 10. He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. So again, this is that plural. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, send us to the pigs, let us enter them. So now Jesus is actually having a conversation with this group of demons that's harassing this guy. And he's, let us go into the pigs. Don't send us off to torment. In verse 13, so he gave them permission. He let them. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. So Jesus says, okay, you can go into the pigs, but then the pigs are destroyed. Surprisingly, Jesus agrees here, and he lets them enter the pigs. The scene turns chaotic, right? There's 2,000. They rush off a cliff and are drowned. Now, the ancient world, the sea is often associated with chaos or the underworld. So the irony could be, this is one writer's description, maybe that the demons get what they sought to avoid, this abyss, getting sent off to torment. We don't really have all that detail, but it doesn't look good for them either way. So Jesus listens and he kind of grants their request, but then they're destroyed. But what happens next is another contrast in the way Jesus has been dealing with people. Look at verse 14. He actually commissions this guy, but listen to what happens with the townspeople and the herdsmen that owned those pigs. Verse 14 says, the herdsmen fled. They told in the city and the country what had happened. Oh, excuse me, I skipped a part. And the people came to see what had happened, and they came to see Jesus, and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. So the word gets out. The herdsmen are like, I just lost 2,000 pigs. You got to see the crazy guy that we've all known for years that no one can restrain. He's better. He's back to normal. He's well. And so people start coming to see what's going on. So they go out to the countryside. Verse 16. Oh, I skipped a phrase there I wanted to say. It said, and they were afraid. So we see kind of a similar response from these herdsmen and the crowd that we just saw from the disciples. They're even more afraid of Jesus after he calms the sea. Here they're afraid of Jesus after he did this. Verse 16 says, those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and the pigs. So they're telling, this is what went down. They're kind of sharing the story. In verse 17, they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. They're like, will you please just go? And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had possessed with the demons begged him that he might be with him, like as a follower, as a disciple. Let me come with you. And he did not permit him. He said, no, you can't follow me. You can't become one of my disciples. Why would he do that? Because he wants him to do this instead. Did not permit him, but he said, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, these 10 cities, how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This is an incredible account. There's kind of three dialogues going on here in this part of the story where Jesus is first talking with the demons. They want to enter the pigs instead of being sent off to eternal torment. Jesus says, okay. And then he sends them into the lake and they're destroyed. Then there's an interchange with the townspeople. They say, Jesus, this is another request, please leave. And he actually grants that one too. He says, okay, I'll go. But the third request is denied. This formerly tormented man wants to join Jesus' traveling band of disciples, and Jesus says no. But instead he commissions him. He sends him out. He says, go to your family, go home, and tell everyone along the way what God has done for you. Tell them what God has done. The mercy of God has come upon you. So Jesus not only restores this guy to his right mind and relieves him of demon possession and oppression, but he restores him to his family. We don't know the whole story of this guy, but he says, go back to your home, back to the people you used to be with, and let them see the mercy of God in your life. So Jesus leaves, but he leaves a witness behind. And it says that all those 10 cities, the Decapolis, this guy went around and was testifying to the glory and mercy of God. It's interesting here. He says, tell all that Yahweh, that God has done for you. But the guy actually tells everybody about Jesus. It's interesting. He says, go and say how much the Lord has done in verse 19. And then in verse 20 it says, he went and began to proclaim what Jesus had done. And this is just another subtle way that Mark says Jesus and God are one. God and Jesus are both the Lord. Mark is telling us that where Jesus acts, God acts. So remember, we've seen Jesus and many times before this when he would heal somebody or cast out a demon, he would say, go and tell no one. But here, he says, go and tell everyone. What's the difference? Why is that? Well, one reason that I came across this week I thought was interesting. This is Gentile territory, remember? And so they don't have a preconceived idea of how Messiah would come and how he would come and kick out the Romans and righteously reign over them for the rest of time. The Gentiles don't even care or know about a Messiah. So there's no need for him to reveal himself as he wants to them. He says, go and tell them that you've just been healed, that God has just taken care of you. So this guy goes and he's like the first little missionary to the Gentile territory. He's going all around proclaiming God's grace and the mercy that he's seen. All right, so now we're going to go back to the other side of the lake, back to the Jewish side, and we're going to meet two different daughters here. And again, as fast-paced as Mark is, look at verse 21. It says, when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, so they go back over to the Jewish side of the lake again, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet. So we've seen this man, demon-possessed man, fall at Jesus' feet, and now we have Jairus, this ruler in the synagogue, fall at Jesus' feet. And he implored him earnestly. He's falling down and begging, crying out for help, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. So she's sick, at the point of death. And it says, and he went with him. So Jesus grants this guy's request. We're going to see the faith of a terrified father here. And we're going to see also that we can come to Jesus with our desperation and our fear. In this part of the text, I want to try to see ourselves in the story, or at least look for ways we can apply it as we go along. So come to Jesus with your desperation, with your fear, with whatever's just messing with you right now, where you think there's nowhere else to go, where you're at your wit's end, where you're done. This is where this guy is. He says, I don't know what else to do. He's a ruler in the synagogue. We see his name here, Jairus. And he's got wealth and resources and leadership in the synagogue and power. And he comes to Jesus and just falls flat on his face and says, I don't know what to do. Come, please. If you would come and lay hands on her, she'll be okay. She'll be made well and she'll live. We have to come in faith also. We come in our desperation, but we have to come in faith saying, God, I believe that you can do something about this. Only you know what to do here. I have nowhere to go. We see this kind of faith mentioned in Mark 9:23. Jesus said to him, someone said, heal me basically, or be clean, or make me clean. And he says, if you can heal my kid. This father says. And Jesus says, all things are possible for the one who believes. And immediately the father of the child, this is a different story, but cries out, I believe, help my unbelief. And this is important to remember when we think about faith. Faith isn't this thing that we kind of muster up, and if we get it up to a certain level, like if our faith meter is really high, then God will do stuff for us. But faith is something that even when we're struggling or doubting, we say, God, I have faith, but help my unbelief in the midst of that. So this guy, again, all we know about him is he's a ruler in the synagogue. He falls flat on his face before Jesus and begs for help. And Jesus says, let's go. Let's go see her right now. And as they go, if you know the story, an interesting thing happens. There's another example of Mark's parenthetical storytelling, or sandwiching, we called it last time. First one we saw back in Mark 3, verse 20, with the family and the scribes opposing him, and then the family coming back. So the scene it's unfolding quickly. Jesus says, okay, let's go. He went with them. But then it says, and a great crowd, this is the end of Mark 5:24, a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. So again, Jesus is going with Jairus and his entourage to go to his house to see his daughter. And then this huge crowd is around Jesus, like we've seen over and over again. People are, as he gets back to that side of the lake, they're waiting for him, no doubt. And they're all around waiting to see what Jesus would do next. And many asking for help. And this woman is in the crowd. She most likely, we see the faith of a suffering woman here. But she most likely had some kind of chronic menstrual bleeding. She was continually, ceremonially unclean. would have to say unclean as anyone would approach her. She couldn't be in a crowd. She was had to be on her own, not unlike the leper we met in Mark 1. But here she is in the crowd. And there's people everywhere, and this woman is in there. She's in the middle of it. We're going to see here that we can approach Jesus, and not only can we, but we must approach Jesus in our suffering. This woman is destitute. We don't even get a name. We've met Jairus. He's a powerful ruler, or at least a guy with a position in the synagogue that people no doubt respected, and he had some resources and wealth. He had, we'll meet more about his family later, but he was a well-known person in the community. And this is just a woman. We don't even get her name. She's unclean. She's destitute. We see that no doctors could help her. She spent all of her money trying to get medical help, and they couldn't help, and it even got worse. So she's just at her wit's end as well. She shouldn't have even been in the crowd because of this unclean. Because anyone she would actually brush up against or come in contact with would become then ceremonially unclean and would have to go through all the ritual purification. And so in Jewish culture, you just stayed away. And she had been doing this for 12 years, we see. So just like the guy with the demon and Jairus, this lady has nowhere to turn except Jesus. You know, we're going to see here we have to approach him with our suffering, and we also have to approach him again in faith. Verse 27 says a little bit about her, why she's in the crowd. She had heard the reports about Jesus. She'd heard about this guy like everyone else in the area, and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. We've already seen this being made well with the demon-possessed guy and with Jairus' request for his daughter. He said, come and lay hands on her so she may be made well. And this lady says the same thing. If I touch his garments, I'll be made well. This is incredible. I know I can't approach Jesus. I'm unclean. Maybe if I just get close and then just kind of touch the edge of his garment or just brush by him, I'll be made clean. I'll be healed. Verse 29, and you know the story. Immediately, there's our action word again. The flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. She could physically feel healing come. This is awesome. Just snuck up behind Jesus or to the side and just barely just kind of brushed up against him and touched his garment real quick. Verse 30, Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? I love this. Look what his disciples say next. His disciples say, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? Like, Jesus, what are you talking about? There's people everywhere. All kinds of people have bumped into you or touched you or whatever. And Jesus says this. He looks around to see who had done it. So now he's scanning the crowd, looking around. Like, why did Jesus do this? Why didn't he just call her out? This word touched is mentioned 4 times here, over and over again in these verses. Perceiving, she said, if I touch him, perceiving who touched me, and just goes over and over. Just the idea that Jesus is overcoming this barrier. And the key here is of uncleanness. She couldn't touch anyone or they would become unclean, but actually her touching Jesus, his power came through and cleansed her. But he did even more than that. He knows power's gone out. This is amazing. What does that mean? Like, how did he feel that? We don't know, but he knows it. I think he is legitimately in the dark in this point about who actually touched him. I think he's honestly asking that question. Like, I'm not sure who that was. Where's that person? He knows something's gone on. This may be one of the times where we see an example of God, of Jesus rather, emptying himself, like we read about in Philippians 2. There were parts of his godness that had to be temporarily laid aside while he was here on earth. Like he had to learn and grow and have his diapers changed and learn how to, eat on his own. And there were certain things he wasn't everywhere present all the time as Jesus, the God-man. But regardless, the woman, verse 33, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Again, another person falling down in fear and trembling, just like the disciples did in the boat, just like this demoniac did, and just like Jairus had just done. We see this lady fall down before him. She's come in desperation with her suffering and in faith. And she explained, this is what I did. And what comes next is incredible. It seems to be the default response to Jesus of so many in the beginning of Mark here. Just fall down at his feet. You're just blown away. You just bow yourself like, I'm not worthy to be here. I can't believe I'm in the presence of Jesus. But what again comes next is even more amazing. Look at verse 34. He says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." We've seen this again. Jesus is healing her. He already has, but he calls her daughter. This is incredible. Having been on the fringes of the crowd surrounding Jesus, this woman now finds herself welcomed into the very family of God. She's not just healed, she's actually brought into God's family. Your faith has made you well could suggest both physical and spiritual healing. I think it does. This word sozo, which is this word heal, it also means save in the New Testament. So in the woman's faith in Jesus for physical healing at the same time became faith for salvation for sin. You can see this again in Matthew chapter 9:22 with the man born blind. We won't take time to read it now, but check it out sometime this week. Faith brings more than the gift of healing. It brings the gift of identity. Jesus called the paralyzed man back in chapter 2, verse 15, his son, because he said, your faith has saved you. And he does the same thing here. He calls this woman daughter. Salvation says more than you are not guilty, you can go free. It also says you're family, you can stay. It says both of those things. If you're a Christian, you are a son or daughter of the King. This story of a woman is part of a much, much bigger story. Ever since the first sin, people have tried to hide from God in their shame, but God will always graciously call them out and not let them hide. God draws us out not to expose us, but to clothe us and call us his own. That's awesome to think about. Think just for a second about this woman. She has been for 12 years without contact with humans, 12 years shunned and outside of society, 12 years wasting her money and trying to spend it all, trying to invest it in getting her well, and none of it was working. She was just getting worse and worse and worse. And now Jesus, she just touches him and is healed, and he says, daughter, your faith has saved you. You're in my family now. You're no longer an outcast. Jesus not only doesn't become unclean by the touching, but he has enough power to overcome her uncleanness in a second. This is incredible. And I don't know about you, but I've grown up reading this story, and this time it really just struck me of how desperate all these people have been and how Jesus alone could do something for them. But the story's not done. We come back to Jairus, right? Remember, we were with him, and Jesus was going to see his daughter. He said, come, if you come, you can make her well and whole. You can make her well and she will live. So this paragraph, or this parenthesis is over now, and we come back. Look at verse 35. While he was still speaking, like as Jesus was still saying, daughter, your faith has made you well, the people came, and it was people from the ruler's house, Jairus, some of his household people, his servants, or whoever was with him. It could have been family people. They came and they said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? So we resume the account of Jairus' daughter by showing this is stark contrast in the way the wording is here. These words, daughter, your faith has made you well, and the fact now that your daughter is dead. So I said we're going to meet two daughters here. This is the second one. We've already been introduced to her need. She's really sick, but now we find out she's passed away. It's too late. Jesus was going to go see her, but now what's the point? Verse 36 shows us the point. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. Again, Jesus defines faith as the antidote to fear. In the face of death, this is the supreme challenge for Jairus. Don't fear, only believe. What are you talking about, Jesus? They just told me she's gone. Verse 37, he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. So they continue, and he has the rest of the crowd and his other disciples stay back and not come. And they come to the house of the ruler in the synagogue. And Jesus saw commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. In the ancient Near East, it was customary to just see the intensity of the mourning that would demonstrate your love for the one who had just passed away. And there were professional mourners that sometimes were hired, and no doubt Jairus could afford something like this, to make sure that the mourning was great. I mean, you can see this in Jeremiah 9:17. It's in Matthew 9:23, Matthew 11:17, Luke 7:12, where these ceremonial mourners were hired and brought in. And he says in verse 39, it says, when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? It's like, what is wrong with you people? What's the big deal? Can you imagine the audacity of Jesus coming in and saying something like this to the mourners? Then he says this, the child is not dead, but sleeping. Now, Jesus isn't saying, you made a mistake here, she's actually just taking a nap. People knew when someone was dead. It was pretty simple to figure that out. They knew that quite well. But he's saying this is temporary. This is more like she's going to wake up. And basically, this is, again, impossible to imagine being in a situation like this as a dad, for example, and then your daughter being dead and Jesus saying, just believe. You'd be like, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't have a category for that. We see three things about belief here, I think. The first is believe in spite of circumstances. Like there are times in life when everything around you is saying, there's no way this is going to work out. There's no way God can do anything about this situation. There's no way I'm going to get to the other side of this. There's no way I'm going to get past this problem or this situation I've found myself in or trouble I've caused myself or whatever it is, whatever terrible situation. When you're in the middle of it, the circumstances say, don't believe. They say there's no way out. You're done for. This is never going to work out in your favor. This is the end. Give up over and over. And this man is called to believe in spite of the circumstances. And we don't hear anything really at this point from Jairus. He's just kind of following along and seeing all this happen. He knows he went to Jesus for help, and he believed Jesus could do something, but then he hears his daughter is dead, and he says, let's go see what's going on. Jesus says, come on. Now he says, she's not dead, but sleeping. Verse 40, the mourners and the other people there laughed at him when he said the child is not dead. They laughed. They said, we know what death is. We've dealt with it. We know exactly what it looks like. But then it says he put them all outside, all the mourners and the other people that were there, except for his disciples and the family itself, the father and mother, it says, took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. So when Jesus challenges the need for mourning with the claim the child is dead, not dead, but asleep, the mourners laugh, and that could perhaps have something to do with them just being hired mourners or whatever, or just thinking Jesus is crazy. Like, no, she's definitely dead. But you can believe in regard of skeptics here. Again, this is not a common occurrence, I don't think, in your life where you see a dead person raised back to life. Jesus is going to do a remarkable miracle here. But there are many people around you throughout your life. If you think long and hard enough about it, you'll know that there are people who have said, don't buy that. Does God really love? Can God really do that? Can God really accomplish those things they say he can? It might even be your own doubts in your own mind. Sometimes I'm skeptical. I'm like, do I really believe this thing? Did God really do this? Can he really accomplish that? Is his word really true? Is he really faithful to his promises? And we're reminded here to believe even in the face of skepticism, whether that's my own or coming from outside. There are many people who mock Christianity and the church and Christians. And this is a reminder to believe regardless of that. Jesus responds by putting him out of the room. And you know the story. Mark 41, he takes her by his hand. He says, Talitha kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And this is Aramaic. That's why it sounds like a foreign language, because it is. But we have the translation, little girl, I say to you, arise. Grabs her hand, says, get up. He uses this term of endearment, little, just like the dad did back when he first met Jesus. He says, my little daughter. She's 12 years old. So it's not little. This is just like a term of endearment. Little girl, I say to you, arise. So this theme of uncleanness or defilement ceremonially is a massive theme in this whole section. We've seen it already with leprosy and demon possession, the guy among the tombs, the woman with the issue of blood. But dead people were not to be touched, or if you come in contact with them, there was a whole ceremonial, ritually way, or a way to become ritually clean after that. And it took a lot of, washings and days of being away from outside of the city and all that. But this is an important theme here. The previous episode was full of it, right? Impure spirits, tombs of dead bodies, unclean pigs. In chapter 7, Jesus is going to address this directly with the religious leaders. But the point here, I think, is the coming of his kingdom shows that he reverses the results of defilement. He actually brings purity and healing to a fallen creation. So Jesus can come in contact with these things and he never becomes unclean. He actually says that death that would normally make me unclean, I'm going to bring her back to life. I'm going to bring life into the situation. Verse 42, immediately, there's our word again, the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement or awe. And then he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. So we're back in the Jewish area where Jesus is saying, I'm not ready to fully reveal myself as Messiah. Or at least I'm going to do that on my own terms because you think I'm going to come to do something different than what I'm actually here to do. And I don't know if you remember way back to the introduction, but Jesus here is the king, but he's coming as the servant king to give his life a ransom for many. So as he's doing these miracles and as he's out serving and loving and working with people, we see this incredible faith again of Jairus. He says, you can make her well and you can let her live. Even there's a hint in Jairus' request that she was going to die. These two miracles represent the second of this, again, sandwiching. There's a bunch of interesting parallels. Faith is the key theme. We already noticed that. Same with the restoration. But Jesus, when he calls this woman daughter, when he heals her, is incredible. This is the only time he addresses someone this way. He called the guy son, of course. And the girl, of course, is Jairus' daughter. The woman had been suffering for 12 years. Jairus' daughter is 12 years old, the same amount of time. And that her disorder would have resulted in ceremonial defilement, just like touching a body would do the same thing. But in each case, Jesus brings purity and wholeness and healing. So we see that he comes to bring mercy to this demon-possessed man in Gentile territory. He comes to Jairus, the well-connected religious leader who led the synagogue. And then he comes to this unnamed woman who's an outcast. So the mercy comes regardless. And this is what I love about the kingdom of God. God does not come to wealthy people. God does not come to poor people alone. He doesn't come to people that live in certain contexts or cultures or of a certain race or ethnicity. The gospel is for anyone who will believe. No matter how much you have or don't have, no matter how smart or not smart you are, no matter what your background is, whether you've been religious or not, Jesus comes to say mercy is for you now, today. This is what I love about Jesus. He came so that a powerful man like Jairus could see his grace and mercy by raising his daughter from the dead. And this unnamed woman who had been outcast for 12 years would know the very love of God and be called a daughter of the kingdom. See, this is important. As we read these stories, it's so easy to think about, that was a long time ago, or that's so crazy, I've never seen things exactly like that. But you are a part of the story. Don't sit on the sidelines and watch. Don't pretend to be strong and self-sufficient. Run to Jesus. Rely on him. Rest in him. Trust him to do what no one else can do. Chances are, if you're just a normal person, you have something in your life right now that it's really hard to entrust to God. That's just part of who we are. There are problems in our lives that come and we just get stressed out. We don't know what to do. We can't figure out what the solution could possibly be. But I want to encourage you today, come to God with it right now. Before you go on to whatever you're doing the rest of the day, just spend a few minutes just surrendering those things to God. Say, God, I don't know what to do here. Help me. Come like Jairus. Come like this woman and just say, I know that if I just come to God, he can do something for me. He can help me through this or give me the grace and strength to address this or work through that or deal with this. Come to him right now. You will not regret it. I want to do that for me and just offer a prayer for all of us right now in that. Let's do that. God, we lean not on our own understanding, but in all our ways we acknowledge you. God, would you make our paths straight? There are so many times in my life I run into a problem or a situation thinking I can try to fix it, or I know what's best. But God, help me to run to you. God, we want to surrender to you today. Show us better how to trust you. And God, even in our unbelief, help us. God, when we doubt or when we're skeptical, would you just remind us about your amazing mercy like these folks have seen? And God, thank you that we can trust you with everything in our lives in spite of circumstances or skepticism, but we can trust you because you're trustworthy. God, thank you for your love and for these stories that remind us about that love. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, if you ever want prayer about any of this stuff, send us a note or stop by, or you can even email us, and we'll spend some time and give you a call and pray. But let's come to God together in this, and again, not sit on the sidelines. Hope you have an incredible week, and we'll see you next week, if not before. Thanks.